Zechariah 8 to 14. So what is heaven to you? Here is a description. I've always enjoyed this one in Zechariah 8 in trying to describe the end of the new created order. What will it be like? Zechariah 8, 4 and 5. Thus says the Lord of hosts, old men and old women shall again sit in the streets of Jerusalem, each one with his staff in his hand, because of great age. The streets of the city shall be full of boys and girls playing in the streets. We sometimes call it in theological terms the beatific vision, the idea of the glorious vision of what the afterlife will be like. And we just have to remember that in the Old Testament story that we will see here, and we have seen, that vision of what the glory that will be hereafter is often pictured in very real terms. Again, sitting on a rocking chair on your porch, watching children play in the streets. What's interesting is the obvious, or the opposite of the beatific vision, also found in Zechariah chapter 14, verse 17. It shall be that whichever of the families of the earth do not come up to Jerusalem to worship the King of the Lord of hosts, on them there will be no rain. So the picture of the opposite of that will be someone outside the city in this story at the end of Zechariah who is in a famine. So, all to say, I think we have to be very careful. The Bible will give us competing renditions of what the afterlife will be like on both sides, whether heaven or hell, to use theological terms. And these competing renditions should not be a problem to us, but should just be understood as part of the story, again, of what these people were understanding about the future, sometimes not as clear as we'd like it to be. Well, Zechariah ends chapters 8 through 14 with some interesting verses that have historically been thought of as prophetic, and so I want to deal with some of them. Zechariah 9:9. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion, shout, O daughter of Jerusalem, because your king is coming to you. He is just and having salvation, lowly and riding on a donkey, on the foal of a donkey. And of course, we know this to be the preferred transportation of a tribal leader in peacetime in the ancient world, and we see Jesus doing this, of course, in the last week as he comes into Jerusalem. Zechariah 10, verse 2. For the idols speak delusion. The diviners envision lies and tell false dreams. They comfort in vain. Therefore the people wend their way like sheep. They are in trouble because there is no shepherd. And we think of the idea of John 10, Jesus being called the Good Shepherd, in reference to that passage. Chapter 11, verses 12 and 13. They weighed out for my wages 30 pieces of silver. And then it goes on to talk about, well, the Lord said to me, throw it to the potter. That princely price they set on me. So I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw them into the house of the Lord for the potter. And Matthew 27, verse 9 jumps at this idea of the 30 pieces and uses it to connect it to Judas, of course. 12:10 in Zechariah. They will look on me whom they have pierced. And it goes on to describe seeing someone who has died. They will mourn for him as one mourns for his only son, and grieve for him as one grieves for a firstborn. John 19:37 sees this text as speaking of Jesus. And then Zechariah 13, verse 7. Strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. Again, this idea of sheep being scattered is actually picked up in Mark 14:27. Well, what do we do with these? These are, and I list them here because Zechariah has numerous ones that come almost one after the other. And so it's often been thought of as a prophetic book in the sense of how Jesus will fit in to these kinds of statements. Let me just summarize some thoughts when I see this. First of all, it should be no surprise that many elements of the Old Testament story, when we hear them described, even narrative elements of someone's life, like a prophet like Zechariah, can be reclaimed by the Jesus story. In other words, this 30 pieces of silver. Remember, Joseph was sold for 20 pieces of silver. So when you have enough narrative in the Old Testament, the chance that there will be connections made between the narrative and something that happens to Jesus increase, right? So I wouldn't necessarily call that prophetic. It just happens to match. Secondly, and we shouldn't be surprised by that as well. With enough detail, we're certainly going to see these kind of matches here and there. Secondly, these are not prophetic in the sense that in some instances anyone could claim this. If I got on a donkey and rode into my hometown next week, I'm not claiming to be the Messiah. Or even if I did, that claim is self-enhanced, right? I'm doing it just because I want to claim a verse. So let's be careful in saying that when Jesus did it, it was a prophecy that just happened to be fulfilled. Those who do not believe in Jesus, of course, simply claim that he took a verse and acted upon it. Third, I think the usual situation is that there's some kind of connection, often just in words or a phraseology or a description of an individual or a group, like this being pierced. That could be true of numerous individuals. The idea of suffering in the Old Testament is common, and the idea that Jesus will suffer is also true. And so those two connecting ideas can sometimes be grabbed at. And again, I wouldn't call that prophetic in the sense that it can happen to a lot of people, not just Jesus. And then lastly, when they are ascribed to Jesus, remember that these verses are picked up, as it were, after the resurrection. In other words, nobody came behind Jesus while he was living, keeping track of the mathematical possibility or probability that he was connecting all these prophetic dots, and then they said, you've established in my mind that mathematical probability can't do this on its own. You must be there for the Messiah. Nobody did that. These are the kinds of statements that are made by New Testament authors after they recognize who Jesus is, and then they go back and they make these connections. So that's not to downplay the connections that the Old Testament will have to Jesus. It's simply to take these for what they are, and that is the strength of reading the story, again, as we've been doing, from left to right, noticing how ideas work in the Old Testament story, and then, of course, we will later see how they fit into Jesus when that time comes.